So I want to introduce you to two of my really good friends. One is Bob Price, who is a Breitbart journalist, and I'm from Breitbart, Texas, yeah. Bob is on the panel with me frequently at What's Your Point? And I have a lot of people say, you know, I'm kind of surprised you and somebody from Breitbart agree on a lot of things. And I said, well, it's because Bob is really devoted to the numbers and the facts like I am. I believe I am. And so we actually end up agreeing quite often on things. And then Charles Foster, one of my oldest friends in Houston. Well, let me say, one of my friends of long standing, yeah. And Charles and I go way back, and Charles is the best immigration lawyer in the United States of America, bar none. By the way, in I guess the early 2000s, George W. Bush was president, and he asked Charles to write an immigration plan, and he wrote one. And if I put it up here on the board today and showed you, it would get 70-80% of the people in this room would vote for it. Okay. By the way, if you put it in front of the American people, 70-80% of the people would vote for it, but you can't get it through Congress because of the political parties. And so what we're going to talk about the next hour here or so is immigration, what's going on, what we think is going to go on, and then a little bit about immigration reform. But this is a critical issue for Houston because I'm telling you, you saw the numbers from the first segment. One of the reasons I want to do that demographics presentation first is you see what a driver it is of Houston growth. Now, there's obviously good things and bad things about immigration, and we're not so much here to try to figure all that out as to talk about what is going to be happening here in the future. And so, guys, the first thing I want to kind of visit with you about, and we had a chance to talk about this some on the phone, is kind of what's actually going on with the numbers, because we hear all sorts of crazy numbers. Back in 23, we had the Census Bureau saying there were only 1 million people added to the population. The CBO said it was 3.8. They had two federal agencies arguing over what the numbers are, and you see all kinds of things. And on social media, it's 10 and 20 million, all this. And so, look, Bob, I know nobody follows a board of numbers closer than you do. Charles has to deal with it every day. So, first of all, tell us what you think. Go back for the last 3 or 4 years and tell me, Bob, what you think has happened in terms of the numbers and where we are today.
Well, thank you, Bill. It's an honor to be here on the stage with you and my friend Charles Foster. It's always good to be here. We worked together on this immigration plan that was discussed, working with Congressman Ted Poe to try to make some kind of a sensible immigration reform package, and even into the Obama administration. And Bill's right. We couldn't get Congress to deal with it. Every president since then has kicked the can down the road. And so, except for one of them just completely forgot about the issue for the last 4 years, and we saw what happened with that. We've seen more numbers in the last 4 years than in the entire history of U.S. Customs and Border Protection coming illegally across the borders, not just the southern border, but we saw record numbers coming across the Canadian border in the Swanton sector, where you had eastern New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, saw more illegal immigration numbers in 1 year than in the previous 25 years combined, okay? And those weren't people that were crossing the border to surrender, like what we saw down in the Rio Grande Valley and Del Rio and some of those places, Arizona. Excuse me. So those were people that were trying to sneak in, that were trying to get past immigration, trying not to get caught, that were paying a lot of money to the cartels that are operating in Canada to try to move these people into the United States. That's the kind of numbers we were seeing. The previous administration said they had an orderly, humane, and forget the other word they used, but it was none of those things. It was not humane at all. People were dying by the thousands trying to get into the United States. People were being attacked, assaulted, raped, children being separated from their families, not by President Trump, but by these cartels that were using them, recycling them, using them as ploys to get past our immigration laws to get into the United States. Well, that's come to a stop. 1 month and 2 days ago, that stopped. And so now you're seeing numbers that Border Patrol agents that I know that have been patrolling the borders for more than 30 years are saying they've never seen the numbers this low. The last week, the numbers are averaging about 230 a day across the entire southwest border. In Del Rio, you used to get that many in an hour 2 years ago, just in the city of Eagle Pass. So there's been a dramatic change, and that change is that people now know that if you enter the United States illegally, there will be consequence, and that you will be returned, and that criminals who are here, particularly these violent gangs like MS-13 and Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan prison gang that came here in massive numbers just 2 years ago. You never heard of Tren de Aragua, right? Never heard of it. We never heard of it. We're sitting there watching the numbers of the Venezuelan migrants that were coming across, great people from Venezuela, were coming across with luxury suitcases, dressed nicely. Hadn't been living in Venezuela, by the way. They'd been living in Colombia and Chile and Peru for decades. They were crossing the border and getting released into the United States. Well, a year and a half, 2 years ago, that changed. Venezuela started emptying their prisons. These gangs started coming up here, paying $10,000 a head to move up into the United States, and you see them making inroads into 18 states across the United States as of a couple months ago. Well, those people now are getting rounded up, put on airplanes, and sent down to Guantanamo Bay. Why? Because the president declared those Tren de Aragua and MS-13 to be foreign terrorist organizations, just like they declared 6 of the Mexican cartels to be foreign terrorist organizations. And so there's a lot of intelligence information that needs to be gathered from these people. Charles may disagree with me on some of this. But you're seeing a change in policy, a whole of government approach to stopping what's been happening for really the last 20 years, but exponentially the last 4 years.
So, Charles, what have you seen in your practice in the numbers over the last 4 years?
Well, of course, in my day-to-day practice, most of it would be focused on representing employers just normally. But in terms of our day-to-day practice, we're not so much affected about what's going on with respect to the border, because the people coming across the border, by and large, have no legal basis to qualify, and I'll get back to that. And for the most part, they have no funds. So any work we do in that area is primarily pro bono. But I'd like to sort of, following what Bob said, clearly what's happened in the last X number of years, you could say it started with the Biden administration, has been unprecedented in terms of the numbers. And I often said as a lawyer, I thought it was like, we learned in law school about Bob, like an attractive nuisance. And what happened was, in part, there was several reasons why that happened. One, you could say, worldwide, it was a phenomenon. People were moving across international borders for a better life, and it was a huge humanitarian issue for a number of countries in Europe, as well as someone mentioned they're from Chile. We had Haitians moving to Chile. There was a lot of movement. Simply, people were fleeing poverty and crime, and so we had that. But this problem was exacerbated. We could have treated that as a massive humanitarian problem, like Germany treated the Ukrainians fleeing into Ukraine. But this problem was exacerbated by the fact that the 1980 Refugee Act, which provided the current provisions for applying for asylum, never contemplate we'd have mass numbers of people coming to our southern border to apply for asylum. And they were taking advantage of that. And we did not react fast enough. And so a lot of people were coming in without inspection. But as Bob knows, even larger numbers on our southern border were surrendering themselves to apply, to make what we call a credible fear claim for asylum. That gave them a tremendous advantage because the numbers were overwhelming the system. They would have to be released, and they would be given given a notice to appear before an immigration judge. Maybe there were so many, it'd be 5, 6, 7 years out. And once they applied for asylum, within 6 months, they could get work authorization. So that
Let's stop. And for the non-lawyers, I'm going to make sure that they understand what you're saying, 'cause it's very important. So under the Asylum Act, I show up and I say, I'm here and I want asylum because I'm fearful for my life.
Yes.
At that point in time, we have to give that person we have to do something to investigate whether their claim is credible or not.
Yes, if they make what we call, and it's a relatively minimal standard, if they pass this initial credible fear standard, then they're entitled to apply for asylum. But rather than being released, typically they would be processed and be given a notice to appear. And in the interim, if logically, they would be incentivized to go ahead and file an application for asylum, because 6 months after that they could apply for work authorization. And that formula was repeated over and over again in large numbers of people. I talked to a Venezuela Uber driver once, and using him as sort of a man on the street, and I asked him about that, and he seemed to have an awareness that he was he was working legally because he had he had filed for asylum, had work authorization, and he didn't really expect. I started to talk to him about his case, and he didn't think he had a good case, but he knew he'd be able to work 5 or 6 years before that hearing. So we were incentivizing people to do that. And my concern was having, as Bill mentioned, having worked on trying to pass immigration reform, that it was making it impossible to talk to anyone about that at all until we controlled the border. And there was a number of smart ways that could have been done.
So you mentioned the cartels earlier. We both talked about this in our phone call. The cartels are making a lot of money off getting people into the country. And a story that I heard, Bob, was that people were showing up with a card that said exactly the words you had to say to make this credible fear claim. So can y'all talk about the role of how this really kind of became a business to take advantage of the asylum laws?
Yeah, it really did it turned these drug dealing cartels that were just basically bringing drugs into the United States and spreading them around the country. It turned them into a Fortune 500 business that's operating in countries all across the globe, operating throughout every major city in the United States now. And they were funded by this huge spike in illegal immigration. Those of you who might have a calculator on your phone or something, run some numbers here real quick. The cartels were averaging the last 4 years $6,000 to $10,000 a head to bring people into the United States. Now, they weren't getting paid up front always on some of that. Some of that they ended up owing the cartels, which means their families are being extorted for this money. That means they are put into indentured servitude in the United States to work off this debt. Women were put into sex trafficking business to pay off their debts, things like that. But take that revenue, multiply that $6,000 to $10,000 times 11 million people. It's a lot of money. That's a huge amount of money. Then you add the people from special interest, what Border Patrol calls special interest aliens. These are people that come from countries with known ties to terrorism. These guys, including China, including countries from the Middle East, are paying up to $25,000 to $50,000 a head to come here. I don't know what you charge for your services. They could probably hire you to do this if they wanted to come here legally, right? So why are military-age men between the ages of 18 and 35, paying $50,000 a head to come here from all these various countries? It's probably not to mow yards and build houses and do road construction. So this is a huge cash business that this has been funding these cartel operations that has enabled the gigantic expansion of their fentanyl business, which China is a willing participant and co-conspirator in this issue. And now you've seen fentanyl become the number one cause of death for people between the ages of 18 and 45. More people killed by fentanyl than by guns, by traffic accidents. Everybody's afraid of aviation accidents now, but those numbers are minuscule in comparison. All of those things combined, the drug numbers, the fentanyl numbers alone, which account for 70% of drug deaths.
Okay, but I don't get this. So we still have the same asylum law. We still haven't changed the asylum law, correct? So what can or is this administration doing different about people coming and making the credible claim?
One of the things they're doing is they're allowing, which they did during the first Trump administration, they're allowing Border Patrol agents to make an initial determination to make or reject that claim. And let me add one more thing. You mentioned the card that people were given. They're instructed and they're coached on how to say that. We interviewed migrants that were coming across the border. They weren't coming here because they were in fear. They were coming here, every one of them, 90%, I'm not going to say every one of them, but 90% were coming here for work because they wanted to make more money. They wanted to have a better life. Who could blame them for that? Okay? But that's not how a legal, safe, prosperous immigration system works.
Let me ask Charles. So tell us about the legality of a border agent determining it's not a credible claim and say, no, you're going to go back right now. What's the law say on that?
Where the law gives that the border patrol officer, the ICE officer that first encounters them, that initial responsibilities. But it's a very, very low threshold. Essentially, if they say, I have a fear that I'll be persecuted for X reason to go if I'm returned to my country, they're going to be processed in the system, and it was. I want to answer one of the questions you said. What we should we do about it? I think the difference over the last 4 years, we've always had people, mostly from Mexico, trying to come here, single males trying to come up here. It's almost a rite of passage, entry without inspection between ports of entry to work, often with the prospect of going home. What changed was the fact that large numbers of people believe they could surrender at the border and be processed and be able to stay here and work here based upon their claim for asylum. And with some of them really believing that application would be approved. We have judges, immigration court judges here in Harris County, I joke, that have a perfect record. They have denied 100% of all of the asylum applications. The liberal bleeding hearts, lawyers that used to work for me that now are immigration judges, they're denying only about 85 or 90% because most people do not meet the technical definition. So I think the answer, and I had worked on this before, I thought rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, there are people, as Bob said, 10%, there are people that really do have credible, clear claims for asylum, that do have genuine fear. And then I thought the answer was that we had to have a sufficient increase in the funding for asylum officers, immigration judges, so that they could be held, and those hearings could be held within a reasonable period of time, so that no one was being released into the country. And if we did that, that would discourage large numbers of people from coming from all over the world. We'd still have people trying to enter between ports of entry, but it would have dealt with the larger numbers that had come in the last.
So I want to change something for a second to talk about the role of Mexico and what it plays in controlling our border, because it's something we talked on the phone about. So I think it appears that Mexico was helping us at one time, then they stopped helping us, and maybe they're helping us again now. So, Bob, you've done some reporting on this. Talk about that a little bit.
So you saw the numbers decrease towards the end of the Biden administration. That came about because Secretary of State Blinken and Alejandro Mayorkas, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, went to Mexico and made some kind of a deal with President Lopez Obrador to get them to stop that train. You all seen pictures of the train covered with people? They called it La Bestia.
Yeah.
Okay, they stopped that. So you could no longer get on that train in Mexico City and ride it to the border. So they had to find other ways to make their way through. But what they never stopped was giving people passes at their southern border, which would be very easy to control. It's a very small border with Guatemala, and giving them 30-day passes to migrate through Mexico to get to the United States. That never stopped. It still hasn't stopped. And so now you're seeing this dispute going back between the newly sworn in first female president in North America, Claudia Sheinbaum. You're seeing some negotiations, if you will, going back and forth where she's saying they won't do something. President Trump gets on the phone with them and says, this is what we're going to do if you don't. She gets back out and says, well, we're going to do that, sort of. But one of the things that they did is they deployed 10,000 members of their National Guard to the northern border. Previously, the National Guard for Mexico had been deployed to the southern border to try to control immigration, but now they moved 10,000 members. Now, their National Guard is a little different than our National Guard. It's really what used to be the Mexican Federal Police, and they put them in tactical uniforms now, and they're calling them the National Guard and setting them up in. And I think hopefully it's less corrupt than the whole federal police system used to be. But that's where you're seeing the big change now on the southern side of the border. We're actually seeing from our side National Guard units on the southern side of the border that are stopping people from crossing.
Charles, I think in our conversation, you agreed with the idea that it's really important what Mexico does with their policy. And I'm curious, sort of looking into the future, do you think Mexico's likely to be cooperative to us and not? To what extent is the threat of tariffs a lever to get them to do something? What do you think the future holds?
Yeah, I think clearly it is a threat of the tariffs that has gotten the attention of President Sheinbaum. But I agree with most of what Bob said, that the best way to control this is for Mexico to control their border with Guatemala more effectively. But they had to balance their internal politics as well. They were not always able to do that because there was humanitarian concerns too. They were more focused on the humanitarian side of it rather than just saying they're all criminals coming here. One thing that the Biden administration did that I think is continuing, a lot of people were coming up from Venezuela and elsewhere through the Darien Strait. So for the first I criticize the Biden administration for not focusing on this issue soon enough, but for political or other reasons, in the last year or so of the Biden administration, they started focusing on this, and they did obtain the assistance of the Panamanian government to enforce that very narrow Darien Strait, stopping a lot of people coming up that way. So I think we're going to continue to have the support of Mexico. I was surprised that the so-called Remain in Mexico policy, I did not think the Mexican government, it was constantly said, well, President Trump was going to reinstate that, but that required the consent of Mexico. But I read she just gave that consent. But that policy has been misconstrued. Remain in Mexico was never intended to remain in Mexico forever, but to remain in Mexico and let those individuals that had arrived at the border, now ports of entry, to be able to allow those individuals to come in on a regular basis to have their claims for asylum adjudicated. So that's in place now.
So let me ask you about another topic, deportations. A lot of talk about deportation and so forth. The numbers really haven't shown that much. What do we really, I guess the number is somewhere between 10 and 15 million people are probably here without some kind of legal status. What do you guys really expect with respect to how deportation is going to play out? Bob, why don't you go first?
Well, Border Czar, who actually admits to being a Border Czar, Tom Homan, is currently not satisfied with the progress that's being made in deportations, particularly of the criminal aliens that are running rampant across the United States in every major city, Trinidad, Uruguay, MS-13, as we mentioned before. So you're seeing cooperation out of the city of New York for whatever reason you want to say that they're cooperating. Art of the deal, I guess. So you're seeing some cities like that are cooperating with the federal government, and they're getting some of the criminal element removed from the cities. You're still seeing cities like Chicago, which has, as Mayor Whitmire said, the highest murder rate in the country. You're still seeing them being completely uncooperative, and to the point now where the threat of criminal charges against public officials are being made against mayors, governors, congresswomen, AOC, some of these. So you're going to see some difference now in cooperation levels as the law is enforced. Sanctuary cities, or so-called sanctuary cities, were allowed to do that for many years, although even Barack Obama tried very hard to remove funding from sanctuary cities. Congressman John Culberson, who I've talked with many times in this particular building, worked very hard with the Obama administration to get enforcement against sanctuary cities, and they did that. They met some legal challenges. And some of those, I think President Trump is about to get revisited on some legal challenges on some of that stuff. But you're seeing a large number. It's about 3 to 4 times the number of criminals being picked up and deported from the country. Some are being sent back to their country of origins. You're seeing some cooperation now with states that are looking for some financial relief by taking people that are nonviolent criminals that are in prisons that we're spending a lot of money on, maybe getting them an early parole and turning them over to ICE to get them out of the country. Those numbers, I think, are going to continue to increase. Now, once you get that criminal element down to a reasonable, manageable level, then is where the rubber's going to meet the road on how dedicated are the American people behind President Trump to dealing with the other 10 million people that are illegally present in the United States that are not guilty of any other crimes other than illegal entry into the U.S.
Charles, so what do you think about deportation?
Well, I have a lot to say about this. Mass deportation, of course, was sort of like in the 2016 campaign, it was build a wall, and for President Trump in the 2024 campaign running, it was mass deportation. So I believe the administration following President Trump, they're under a lot of pressure to show that they're bringing about mass deportation. But for reasons Bob would understand, a lot of that's going to be PR, because one thing that's factually true, as of today, the Trump administration has no more resources than what the Biden administration had. Now, the Biden administration, from a policy point of view, early on, they issued a policy saying, using what we call prosecutorial discretion, that enforcement was to be focused almost entirely on the detention and removal of people with outstanding deportation orders and criminals. But interestingly, the Trump administration, as they did in 2016, they came in and they revoked that. They said, no, everyone is equally subject to, that's here without proper documentation, equally subject to arrest and detention. So I think there's a problem that the Trump administration has, and that is that they've overpromised. They want to remove all of these criminal aliens, but that was the focus of the Biden administration. So surely there are criminal aliens out there, but they're not that. If they were easy to find and to detain, they would have been. So if you look at the figures of the people being arrested and removed, a large percentage of them are just regular people that came here perhaps through ports of entry without inspection or overstayed their tourist visas and have lived here for years. I was involved with a client where the ICE, this happened under George W. Bush when I was working for him, where they would actually have what we call workforce enforcement, worksite enforcement, otherwise known as raids. And there was a raid recently on one of the clients we had where they brought Fox News. And when they went there to pick up the workers, they thought they could identify 6 or 7 of them, and the only ones they could find were some old, elderly men that had worked there for the company for 20 years. And the ICE agents were a little embarrassed that they didn't want to bring these elderly men out in handcuffs, so they sent the news media away. I think the point I want to make is before the administration can have much change, they're going to have to, and I think they will be successful in getting a lot of funding. But this begs the question. Any way you want to look at it, listening to Bill's statistics, we can condemn illegal immigration, but you have to ask yourself, where would we be today without that 8 or 10, 11 million people that are working in undocumented status? We wouldn't be building any homes in Houston. We wouldn't have many restaurants operating. We wouldn't be having hotels being able to service the rooms. Short of those individuals with criminal tendencies or records, yeah, we want to get rid of them. But the truth is, if the administration could remove all those individuals, it would be an economic disaster. And so it begs the question, in looking at the statistics that Bill dealt with, what we really need to do, and going back to the first administration of George W. Bush, is we need to reform our immigration laws so that that we have a system that works. One more thing, and I'll give up the microphone. The new Secretary of Homeland Security, Christy Nolan, is now releasing videos, sort of a PR campaign, and they're telling people, Donald Trump is going to enforce the law. You better go back. If not, we're going to fine you, arrest you. And if you go back, that way you will be able to come back legally. That's completely false advertising. The reason low-skilled people come here to work is there is no legal system. There is no way. People often say to me, I hear this all the time, go back and come in legal. That is impossible. There is no system for low-skilled
Yeah, so this was my list of things. Can you explain why someone from Mexico or South America, Central America, cannot get here legally now?
Because we have an extremely restrictive legal system. An example, you look at all the brightest graduates of U.S. universities with PhD degrees from Rice, Stanford. Under our system, once they graduate, they have no more than about a 25% chance of staying here. There is a system for people that professionals with advanced degrees that more or less works, but even there, it can be a struggle.
That's the H-1B visa.
H-1B, we also have for people that can make a significant investment, people of extraordinary ability.
But tell me about the sheetrock hanger guy that wants to come here to hang sheetrock.
The closest thing, having been involved in companies that do that, there is no legal system for that at all. The closest thing that comes to that is the H-2B program for seasonal workers. So there's two problems. That's 66,000 numbers a year. It's seasonal, and most of those numbers are taken because ski resorts and other seasonal operations use those, and that number of 66,000 a year would be just a smattering. Most jobs are not seasonal. So other than that, there is no system, period. So the exception is agricultural work, H-2A program. You can come legally, and people in the agricultural industry can use that program to bring people in legally. But otherwise, there is no system.
So let me just ask both of y'all this opinion from a demographic perspective, and I will tell y'all one thing that I'm probably going to write about this sometime in the near future. One problem that I've had is, all these people are supposedly coming into the country, and so I've been out looking for where they are, trying to find them in the data someplace, and I can't find them. I mean, I look at like census numbers, and I look at public school enrollments. Texas and California are two places where supposedly the biggest beneficiaries of this in Florida. You look at the public school enrollment numbers for those states; they're flat for the last 10 years. You look at emergency hospital admissions. I mean, I've tried to find all these places where I would think that they would show up in the stats, and I'm not seeing them anyplace. I'll tell you a really interesting example. Was it Youngstown where we had the Haiti? Was that the? So they were talking about this. It flooded the community up there, and so I went and looked at the census numbers for that county. Hadn't changed in 10 years. I looked at the hospital admissions for the county hospital there. Hadn't changed in 10 years. I mean, I couldn't see any place in the stats that they were showing up. Now, that's two possibilities. Number one, they're living a kind of lifestyle where they don't show up in typical stats. I'm sure that's some of it. Or number two, the numbers are exaggerated. And I suspect it's some part of either one of those. But here's my question for you, for people that are worried about demography going forward. And I'm actually... I told you the Texas Demographic Center is about to release their new projections, and this is one issue that they're really struggling with: is what do we put down as the immigration number? And HGAC recently put up for a brief period of time and then took down their projections, which showed that immigration was going to just continue like it always has. That seems extremely unrealistic to me based on what's going on now. So, if a demographer came to you and said, what do you expect over the next 4 or 5 years for the immigration numbers to be? What advice would you give them, Bob?
Well, one thing that I think we need to do is increase our legal immigration. We need to address some of those issues that you talked about. We do need more people coming here from countries around the world. Norm Adams, a good friend of mine, has an insurance business here in town, and he used to stand up in front of rooms like this and say, you guys aren't making enough babies to replace yourselves. Well, nationwide, that's true. Our society is declining in natural-born population. The number of foreign-born babies in the United States, foreign citizen babies that were born here and became citizens, outnumbers the American birth rate. So there is a reason why we need more people. All of us baby boomers are retiring, coming out of the workforce. Somebody's got to replace those people in the workforce to keep paying the taxes to keep the system alive. I think you're going to see more legal immigration. Eventually, once this border security crisis is done, people are going to be willing to have a conversation about legal immigration. Right now, as you said, nobody's willing to do that because we can't address the blister on your finger because you've got a gaping wound that's pumping an artery over here. We've got to deal with the urgent crisis first so that we can then have a reasonable and intelligent discussion about how we get immigration that serves the needs of the United States in a way that makes sense and is not based on some of the things that have been done in the past.
So you sort of stole my next question, which is, what are the likelihoods of actually getting a rational immigration reform system done in this divided Congress? And
today, none.
Yeah. And Charles, what are your thoughts on what immigration is going to look like, and also what do you think the chances are of getting a rational immigration bill passed?
I don't see, with the climate today, much change. You would have to say today that the chances of getting anything remotely in terms of immigration reform, or even for years we worked on what was called comprehensive immigration reform, and then I would talk to John Cornyn and others, and they'd say, no, we'll do it in single bills, smaller bills. We can't deal with big bills. But today, for example, the lowest of the low-hanging fruit would be a DREAM Act bill for the DACA beneficiaries. That's something that would have had some bipartisan support. And I think today it would be hard to get a single vote, particularly on the Republican side of the aisle, because the focus is entirely on enforcement. So I don't see, it's possible. I've made this argument, like Nixon went to China. He was the last person anyone thought would open up relations with the People's Republic of China. It's possible that Donald Trump would want that credit and could do something counterintuitively. I mean, if you want to take the most optimistic view, but I think we'll get closer to being able to say we have a secure border. It will never be perfect. So, in theory, we should be able to deal with immigration reform because, for all the reasons you said in your initial remarks, we need immigrants. We just need them to come in legally.
Okay, I'm going to stop this and now take some questions from the floor. Back here in the very back.
We have any idea? I've got a microphone here.
For social services for illegal immigration, including hospital, medical, school care.
So the question is, do we have any idea how much we're spending on that?
Well, I'll take the first stab at that. We obviously, they're people, so we spend money indirectly and directly. One example would be public schools. Irrespective of your immigration status, Supreme Court, Flower versus Doe, you can go to a public school. Immigrants show up because they do not have, they cannot even buy insurance in many cases. They show up in the emergency room. So there is a cost. They are prohibited by law from receiving direct public assistance. And but I would say one more thing. Immigrants, often it's said, well, they shouldn't go to school because they're not taxpayers. That's wrong. Their parents pay taxes just like us. They pay gas tax, liquor tax, sales tax, cigarettes tax. Most of the taxes, even real estate taxes, are built into their rent. So they still pay taxes according to their level of income, mainly through these indirect taxes.
Bobby, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I saw a stat the other day, and I'm not going to authenticate the accuracy of it, but it said about 150,000 per year per migrant. Okay, so that's a lot of money. Some of that is in healthcare. Some of it's based on this cost of putting them up into some of the highest expensive hotels in New York City while you've got homeless veterans out on the street. So there's a lot of cost that's being stopped. The president ordered all federal funding to illegal immigrants to stop this week. Kristi Noem actually fired somebody who continued paying for hotel rent for migrants, and that stuff's going to probably come to a stop. But there is a tremendous cost to the American taxpayer that's not, there's been a tremendous cost to the state of Texas, who spent $11 billion in the last few years to do the job that the federal government was supposed to be doing, the job that we paid them to do. There's a bill before Congress now to hopefully reimburse Texas for that $11 billion, and boy, couldn't we use that for some things that the mayor
I'll
talked
say,
about.
I spent a bunch of time trying to figure this out and couldn't figure it out. There are certainly costs associated. There's also taxes, directed and indirected, that are paid. You know, one of the odd things about this is, with all this attention about Social Security, so these workers show up with a fake Social Security number, and they work, money's taken out of their check, and it's sent to Social Security, but they never get the benefits because it's a fake account. And so I think there's something like, I want to say it's $200 billion or something account at Social Security that they can't match to a Social Security number. So there's actually excess money coming in there. So I don't know how you would ever sort out an accounting of all that. Basically, people on the left that, you know, think immigration is a good thing say, you know, we actually get a benefit from it. The people on the right who hate it say that it cost us $150,000 an immigrant. But I can tell you, after spending a bunch of time trying to look at it, I couldn't really figure it out. And my guess is it's probably closer to a wash than anything else. Yes, sir.
Big. Okay. Yeah, it sounds like this issue is not really an immigration issue, but it's a labor issue, or rather a labor shortage issue. And I don't understand why down in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, we can't have staffing companies down there hire people, bring them up to the United States to work on a 28 on, 28 off basis, and under a work visa, and have them sponsored, and room and board provided, and then they go back for 28 days, and a new crew comes in. Because I worked in the petroleum industry and retired from ExxonMobil, and we have people at ExxonMobil that go to Angola, Equatorial Guinea on a 28 on, 28 off basis to support operations over there.
Charles.
Yeah, well, I think that'd be one of many, many good ideas that I could give you dozens of other proposals and thoughts. But the short answer is it's virtually impossible to get anything through Congress. And I'll give you an
And it's not currently legal to do that, correct?
No, there's no basis in the law to do what you said. It would be a good idea, but it would take an act of Congress to do that. And again, we came close to getting a DREAM Act, but what's her name, Laura Ingraham on Fox News? She called it amnesty, and that immediately killed the possibility. So anything like that always gets killed in Congress.
A side benefit would be it would help build a middle class in those countries, which would be good for everybody.
Look, there's a lot of rational ideas, but the problem is we can't have a rational conversation in Congress about this anymore.
Bill, Bill, I'm over here, right here.
Joe.
So, Bill, I was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors.
This is Mayor Sugar on Joe Zimmerman, so.
U.S. Conference of Mayors this January, and we had the Mexican ambassador to the United States was there talking about immigration and talking about, and what he said was right now there's about 380,000 green cards that allow primarily Mexicans to come over here, work, solve some of the labor issues. And the question that was asked was, how many could that be? And he said it could be 700,000 to 800,000. Again, these are people that don't want to come and live here. They want to come in, earn here, get a green card, and then periodically go back. And the other question was asked was, is that doable in this Congress? And he said, probably not. But that is a way to solve it.
Like I say, there's a lot of good rational ideas how to solve this problem if we could have a rational conversation about it. You know, one of the things that I think, Bob, you made the point in the conversation is that there's this irony about it's so hard to get here that it discourages people from coming here and going back, because if you go back, then you got to pay the tariff to the cartels. all over again. Okay, I'm going to take it to a couple of more questions because I know y'all are dying. I got my energy guys here all fired up about ready to go. Now, you've already had one, so back here.
Hello, I'd just like to address the comment about how restricting immigration of any type would affect service industries and whatnot, excuse me, here in the U.S. I've lived in Japan for a total of 15 years. They have very little immigration of any type. They get along fine. They have all their employment needs met. They build buildings. They run railroads, better than Metro. So it can be done. You don't need immigration to run a modern economy.
Yeah, go to Sioux City, Iowa, and see who's making beds and washing dishes and that kind of thing.
What if you go to, if you,
But by the way, I met with the Minister of Immigration of Japan. They actually do. They do have they have for years they had Korean immigrants. They have immigrants from other countries. Very restrictive. It's very hard for them to go from an immigrant status to get citizenship. We're a far more open country in that regard. And I think to say that we could do without them, if we have the lowest unemployment rates maybe in history, how would you fill 11 million jobs if you did not have those undocumented workers here today?
why did the Biden administration let so many people in?
I think the proper way, when you say they opened the borders, I think what they did, which that was called opening the borders, was they allowed large numbers of people to be admitted to file for asylum, and so there was faults on every side. First, you had an unprecedented number of people coming, and you could blame that on the Biden administration. You could blame that on Governor Abbott. He was advertising that the border is wide open. I heard him say that many, many times, and the cartels were showing that to the world.
Because it was true.
True, but they criticized Mayorkas for saying we have a tough border. And if you're trying to discourage people from coming, what's the better message? The border's wide open, or it's a tough border?
Generally, I find truth to be the right message.
There was one other reason. The Biden administration was following the law. That once the people touch the U.S. soil, they allow them to pursue their asylum claim. And that would take a change in the law. And both the Biden administration and the Trump administration have ignored that at different times, only to be enjoined by federal court.
You know, I think, I would say one thing that I find, troubling about the way this current works is, one president comes in and the main thing he does is undo everything the last president did. It happens on both sides. And I think a lot of the Biden administration reaction to Trump was just saying, well, if Trump did it, it's got to be bad, And Trump's doing the same thing here too, but it happens on the side. I think what you were implying is they come here to vote, and I'm telling you that is not true. I can promise you from all the work I've done in elections over 50 years, the number of non-citizens that vote is minuscule, and it has never affected an election. Okay, we're going to wrap this up, and we're going to move on to our energy panel. Can you all give a hand to these two guys? By the way, I want to say, these are two guys that have sort of different views about immigration, but you see the kind of respectful conversation they have with each other about these issues. Isn't that what we need a whole lot more of, for sure? Thank you, Janice.